Good evening and welcome to another TEFL Academy webinar. My name is Luan and I will be presenting to you this afternoon or this evening or this morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm in Cape Town, South Africa, and it would be great to see where you are, who we have with us today. So please, while we're chatting, while we're presenting today, pop your name and your location in the chat function and let us know where you are today. So while we wait for those names to come in, for everyone to join, let's just have a quick chat about what is going to be happening today. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and of course, I will take all those valuable questions that you may have a little bit later on. So, as mentioned earlier, my name is Luan. I have been with the TEFL Academy for a very long time, since about 2015, and I've been training teachers ever since. I'm very happy to be with you today. I am a teacher, I'm a language practitioner, an examiner, and a tutor trainer. And as mentioned, and I think this is the best of all, is that I've been an English teacher for over 13 long years. Feels like 13 short years because it's been amazing. And during this time, I've taught students of all ages, all levels, from all over. It's been amazing. And as mentioned earlier, I'm very happy to be part of your journey. So now that I've introduced myself, I would love to see who we've got with us today. So yeah, let's have a look. The names are just streaming in. We've got Chandre, and Chandre is also from Cape Town, South Africa. Welcome to you. Rajasvari, and you are from Malaysia. Hello, welcome. We have Quinn from Toronto, Canada. Hello to you. And Melissa Lee, also from Toronto, Canada. And then we have Carol from Kingston, Jamaica. Mark from London. Hello. We have Hamza, and Hamza is also from Cape Town, South Africa. Agata from Poland, very welcome. And then we have Ellie. Ellie is from Cornwall in UK. I've heard Cornwall is so beautiful. And then we have Rachel. Hello to you. And Alex. Alex is from France. We also have Sinead from Joburg, South Africa, and Sarash from Pakistan. And Rachel, yes, you're from the United Kingdom. Welcome to you. And then we also have Julie. Hi, Julie, from Quebec, Canada. Rachel, sorry, from South Wales. So very nice to have you all here. And I'm sure those names will still come flooding in. Hello. Harmony from Nashville, welcome to you. So as mentioned, today's webinar is exciting, it's interesting, it's necessary, because what do we do as teachers? We talk to our students, but we don't only give them information, we ask them questions too. So today's webinar is particularly useful for all of you wondering how to structure questions in the classroom. Because remember, the way we check that our learners are on track is by asking questions. Right, so just a little bit of housekeeping. Only today's topic will be discussed in this webinar. And later on, once the presentation section of the webinar is finished, you will have the opportunity to ask all those important questions. And my advice, and I always recommend this during these webinars, is to save your questions for a little bit later on when I open up Q&A, so that I can absolutely address all your important questions and not miss them because they've come through so much earlier. All right, so if you've got a question, jot it down, write it down, and then as soon as Q&A opens, do ask your questions. As mentioned, only questions pertaining to today's webinar will be answered. If you have questions outside today's topic, you're more than welcome to send them to tutor support, where all our tutors are more than happy to assist you. All right, so I think it's time to get started with this very important topic: how to ask questions, how to structure questions, teach a language in the classroom. Right, so the very first thing that we really need to think about is questions in the classroom and the different kinds of teacher language that we are referring to when we speak of teacher language. So, of course, lots of people think, well, language, it's English. Yes, that's a given. So when we refer to teacher language, it's that exchange, that verbal exchange between you and your students. And today's webinar is really going to help you understand the fundamentals of talking to your students. So the very first thing, as mentioned, that we need to speak about is the different kinds of teacher language. The first thing we've got on our list, as you can see there today, is eliciting. Then we have concept checking. Then we have instruction or instruction checking. And these all involve the teacher asking questions. We're so used to, we're programmed into thinking that it's our students who ask questions, and of course they do. But remember, for us to gauge and evaluate and assess how well they've understood something, the best way is to ask a few important questions. Right, so let's get into these techniques. How do we do that? How do we get our students to ask questions, and how do we, in turn, ask them the questions to assess their understanding? So there are techniques used to prompt your students to come up with information rather than giving it to them. And this is a change from simply telling students everything they need to know. It involves a lot of planning, I will say, and work for the teacher, a lot of insight into who your students are, what they sound like when they speak, and what they want to hear when you speak to them. So when we elicit, it can also be used to brainstorm a topic. It can be used to produce the target language. And remember, teachers, when I speak of target language, it's the content of what we're teaching for the day, whether it be vocabulary for a restaurant, whether it be the past simple tense, whether it be the present perfect tense, those tenses, those groups of vocabulary that I refer to, that's our target language. So how do we get our students to produce the target language or the vocabulary that we taught them for the day? Well, we elicit, we ask questions. So the aim is to find out how much our students already know, what they already know. This is such an important step because it tells us where they are, and it also lets them know. It gives them that security that teacher is checking in. And for me, that unspoken exchange is so, so, so important in all of this too. Right. So we've already spoken about what eliciting is. It is to get your students to say something before you do. If you're teaching them a word, give them a little context to get them to say the word. If you're teaching them a brand new tense, get them to produce the model sentence without you using it yourself. And why is this so important? Well, students take a more active role, as you can see on the slide. They're more involved. In the lesson. They're more involved in their learning process. We want to see our students really engaged in their learning so that they remember the target language that you've taught for the day. And students, the second important thing for me is that students bring in their own experiences and their own language knowledge into the classroom. And the teacher shouldn't assume that students don't know something. This is why eliciting is so important. It tells us, it gives us those little nuggets of what they already know, what they're struggling with, what they have no clue about. That's all part of eliciting. And eliciting is used as a foundation on which to build further learning. So can you see why this technique is so, so, so important? Right, so how do we elicit? So there are various ways to elicit target language. We can use pictures. They always say a picture speaks 1,000 words or something to that effect, right? So we use pictures. We show them a picture and we see what they come up with. What language do they use? And when I say language, what grammar, what vocabulary, of course in English, do they use to explain what they see, to react to what they see? They verbally react to pictures, and that's the stuff we get. And we see, so they know this, they don't know this. There are some interesting words there. Then also you can do a role play. It could be something physical where the teacher does something with the students. It could be something on the screen, but it also brings out what your students maybe already know about a given situation. A brief description, synonyms. If I'm trying to maybe elicit the word furious, from my students. Now, this is quite a high level word. Maybe what I'll do is I'll give them lower level synonyms and I'll say, you know what, I was really angry yesterday, but super angry. Does anyone know a word for super angry? And then see if furious possibly comes up. So, by giving graded synonyms, can also get your students to produce the target language you want them to produce. And then think, as a teacher, as you're sitting here now, think if there are any other eliciting methods that you can think of. I like giving my students a little context, like the angry episode that I explained to you earlier, by telling them, you know, yesterday in the traffic, someone threw some trash out of their window, and I felt really, really angry. Or ask them, how do you think I felt? Teacher, you felt angry. And I'll say to them, you're on the right track there, but I was super angry. I was ready to scream and shout. Does anyone know a word to describe that feeling? And then see what they come up with. So, me, context is my favorite. Little one liners just to prompt them to say the word I want them to say. But the important thing here, teachers, is that we do not use the word first. Why? That gives away a word that maybe you could have elicited from your students. Right, let's move on. So here's an example of a teacher eliciting. The teacher is looking for a particular word. The teacher wants to elicit a specific word from her students. So the teacher shows them a picture of a lovely woman in the corner over there and says, how does this woman feel? How do you think she feels? The students may respond with, teacher, she's smiling. She's so happy. And then the teacher says, yes, she is very happy. Is there another word for very happy? And then your students might come up with excited. And that feels great. And it's not to say that the word excited no longer needs to be taught, because remember, one or two students may have shouted out the word excited, not the whole class, but that tells you that a couple of them are already on track and know what the word is. Right, and then the teacher can carry on. Yes, what other things might I be excited about? And then your students will give you examples, and that's clarifying the meaning of the word through that context that the teacher set initially with the picture and the woman's feeling. So that's what eliciting is about. It's about setting a context, using a picture, using a little video clip, and getting your students to almost guess the word that you're trying to get to, that you're trying to teach them, before just saying, this is the word we're learning today, and this is how you say it. That is old school. We don't do that anymore. So we try to elicit. And as mentioned earlier, why? Well, it makes the content of your lesson more likely to be remembered. And also, your students tomorrow, if you ask them about this word, as mentioned, they'll remember it, because why? They've been part of the eliciting process. Right. So when eliciting, some very important things to remember is that your students don't know everything. So don't expect them to come up with everything. It's not a magic formula that if you elicit, they're naturally going to know the word. Remember, eliciting is to just see what they already know. So don't expect them to just know everything. Eliciting is often a gradual process, and you prompt them for the words or the grammar or the tense that you're trying to teach them. Always provide sufficient context to guide your students to the vocabulary or to the tense that you're trying to teach them. If I say to you, I walked up to receive an award and I fell, how do you think I felt? And my students say sad, upset, hurt. You know, maybe it's not the word I'm looking for. I'm perhaps looking for the word embarrassed, but my context wasn't strong enough. So I'd have to extend that a little bit by saying, all those things, yes, but most of all, I felt terrible because everybody saw and I just wanted to hide my face. How do you think I felt? And then they're likely to say the word embarrassed or shy or ashamed, and then they're more on track. So absolutely provide sufficient context for your students to come up with the target language. Don't use vague questions. which are open to interpretation. Get right in there because your learners need that kind of guidance to get them to produce the word you're looking for. And then here's the thing, if you find that your students cannot answer your questions, that you have now elicited until you're blue in the face, please stop. Stop eliciting and provide the target language. It's fine to do this if they genuinely don't know the target language. If you feel that your context was strong enough and clear enough, and that you even extended your context a little bit just to clarify and get the word or get the tense out of them, and they still don't know, it's absolutely okay to tell them the target language. Right. And also, something important to remember is to grade your language. Now, what does this mean to grade our language? When we speak to students, we need to bear in mind what their level is. Imagine you're learning another language, maybe French, maybe Italian, maybe Arabic, maybe German, and your teacher in your class is using vocabulary and grammar that you have in that new language that you have not yet learned. Can you imagine how you'd feel? I want you to punch a few adjectives into the chat function right now to describe your feeling. Now, remember, you're sitting in a language class, learning a new language, and the teacher is using vocabulary and grammar that you've not yet learned in that language. What are those? What are the first few feelings that come to your mind? Type them in the chat function, in the chat box for me. I'd love to know how you would feel in that moment, right? Absolutely, yeah, they come. Confused. You'll feel confused. I think lots of confused coming through. Absolutely. And not only confused, absolutely confused, but also frustrated, out of my depth, nervous, stressed, Melissa. Sinead, you came up with nervous, panic, just panic. Absolutely. So think about it. If we as teachers in English do not grade our language at a suitable level for the students we're teaching, they will feel all those horrible feelings that you've just punched in there. Some of you went big. 3 adjectives in a row, Amina. Confused, frustrated, and embarrassed. Absolutely. So grading our language is really important. We need to keep yes, I want to. Sarash said something here that I find very important. Like, I don't know anything in the language. Absolutely baffled. It's a horrible feeling because you feel like, okay, I thought I'd learned a few things, but suddenly I feel out of my depth, to use something that someone else said earlier. Absolutely. So, grading your language as an English teacher is imperative. You've got to remember, what is the level of the class I'm speaking to? What do they already know at this level? And not only vocabulary, but also grammar. If they don't know the future continuous tense yet, I cannot use it in my speaking. If they've never learned the present perfect tense, those have you ever tenses, and they've not yet learnt it, I cannot use it. And that is what grading your language is all about. Thank you for sharing, just by the way. Those are so, so useful. So as mentioned earlier, if your students cannot answer the questions, just stop and provide the target language. Use varied approaches if necessary. If you feel that a little context is not enough, use a picture to supplement that context. And then, as mentioned earlier, over and above everything else, grade your language. And again, thanks for all those fabulous ideas. Right. So when it comes to speaking to our students, we have now spoken about eliciting, right? And the other side of the coin, now that we've elicited the target language, or now that we've elicited the vocabulary, we want to check that they know what we're talking about. We want to check that they've understood what it is that we've been teaching, right? So the very next technique we're going to discuss is concept checking. So these are questions, and I like to call them trick questions, but only I call them that. I don't tell my students that. That'll scare them too, right? So these are questions that we can ask to check whether our students have understood the new word or the new tense or the new phrase that we've just presented. Now, there's the little question on the board or on the screen, the second point. It says, do you understand? That there, I'm so sorry to tell you, teachers, is a useless question. It's not a reliable indicator of comprehension. Your students are very likely just to say yes. Yes, I understand. And they often say yes, I understand for a couple of reasons. One, because genuinely and deeply on the inside, they feel they've understood, whether they have or they haven't in reality. The other reason is maybe in a classroom setting, they don't want to be the one person saying no when everyone else has said yes. And then little kids, for example, and some adults too, when there's a break time pending, very often they'll say yes just to get the heck out of there so that they can go and have their break. So there are various reasons why your students won't accurately answer that question and why it is therefore not a very reliable indicator of comprehension. So think about concept questions as little questions to replace do you understand? Instead of asking our students, do you understand the word excited? We've now learnt the word excited. Do you understand? Everybody will just say yes, and you know nothing, right? So when it comes to concept questions, make sure that they are simple, unambiguous, and closed initially. Make sure that your first few concept questions are closed. This means that the answer to the concept question is limited, it's restricted, it's predetermined almost. And that will tell you whether, and based on whether your students give that answer or not, will tell you whether or not they've understood the new word or the new phrase or the new tense. And then look, there is that second point. Parade your language. There it is again. And I think the reason that it comes up on every screen almost is should just let you know how important that is. Right. Then keep your concept questions easy. We want our students to be able to answer them because those answers are like gold. Those answers are valuable. Those answers tell us whether or not they've understood the word excited and its meaning, right? So keep your concept questions simple, unambiguous, graded, easy to answer, and very importantly, initially closed. Only one correct answer per question. And then, if necessary, or if you feel like it, ask a few slightly more open-ended questions towards the end. But first and foremost, those first few points with concept checking are the most important. I use them every single day in my lessons because I find asking people, do you understand? Does nothing for me. It doesn't tell me whether or not they've understood. Right, so remember, earlier, we taught the word excited to our students, right? So now we're going to show a few concept questions that you can ask your students to check whether or not they've understood the meaning of the word. So we've taught the word excited, it's on the board, and now I'm going to ask my students a few questions. Class, do you get excited? We just learned the word excited. Do you get excited when you're invited to a party? They're likely to say yes. How about going to the dentist? You know what? I'm going to say they're going to say no. And then, is excited just a good feeling or a great feeling? And your students will most likely say it's a great feeling, it's better than good. Yes, being excited is a great feeling, right? And we know that something good is going to happen. So those questions, can you see what the answers are to those questions? They're yes, no, great, one word answers to check whether or not they've understood the word excited. Another example, if I'm trying to teach the word lost, if I'm lost, do I know where I am? Not necessarily. Do I know where I'm going? No. Do I need to be somewhere? Yes. Can I find my way there? No. So those are little questions you can ask to check whether or not your students have understood the word. What about the word furious that we spoke about earlier? If I feel furious, do you think I feel happy? Your students will say, no. Do you think I feel angry? Yes. Do I just feel a little bit angry or am I very angry? Teacher, you're very angry. So can you see that the answers are closed? The answers are limited. And the way my students answer these concept questions will give me a clear indication of whether or not they've understood. And maybe there are still one or two that do not. That's another useful function of concept questions. They're useful, right? All right. So here are, please pay attention to the heading. Here are a few bad questions or concept questions for dinosaur. What animal is large and bites? Your students will say dinosaur. Now, that doesn't really check their understanding because they'll just go on autopilot and say the word you've taught them a few minutes ago. Second question, have you seen one? Not really great either because some of them will say no, hopefully, and some of them will say yes, maybe in a museum or something like this. And again, because of these varied answers, bunch of excited children, the teacher has no indication of whether or not the word dinosaur has been understood. So here's a task for you. I would like you to type a couple of concept questions that you think would give you, as the teacher, an indication of whether your students have understood the word dinosaur. I'd like you to type them in the chat function, a couple of good or better concept questions for dinosaur, right? So you can type them in the chat function, and remember the first two on the screen, not good examples. Why? Because the first one is really open and undirected, and also the students in that first one are expected to answer with the word dinosaur, and as mentioned earlier, they're going to go on autopilot and shout out the exact word they've been learning. Doesn't tell you that they've understood the meaning. Have you seen one? Again, avoid experience or opinion based concept questions because then again, answers will vary. So let me see. I love these. They're coming in hot and fast. So we've got Rajasvari. Is it a large animal that is not alive anymore? Beautiful. You're so on the right track. And what I also like, Rajasvari, is that your language is beautifully graded. It's nice and simple. It's slow. So by the time we're teaching a word like dinosaur, your students will know probably every single word in your question. Great job. Alicia, are dinosaurs alive today? Fantastic. Fantastic. Um, do dinosaurs exist now or in the past or then? Absolutely. An animal that is extinct. Remember, Robert, I've got a couple here. Which huge animals used to live? Um, your students are going to say the word dinosaur. And remember, they've just learnt the word dinosaur, so it doesn't really tell you that they've understood the meaning. They're just going to shout out the exact word they've learned. Same with what animal lived a long time ago but is no longer living. They're just going to shout out the word dinosaur, and that does not tell us that they've understood the meaning. But do dinosaurs still exist today? No. That is a clear concept question. And then I want to go back to Rajasvari. Is it a large animal that is not alive anymore? Beautiful concept question. So many of you are on the right track, and those of you who are still finding your way with concept questions, it's a difficult technique that really comes with practice and research, and asking lots of questions. Absolutely. I think a couple more are coming in here. You're welcome. Yep. Are dinosaurs, do they live now or in the past? Yes. Were dinosaurs very dangerous? I like that because, again, what I really like about that one, it's adding to it's covering all aspects of meaning. Because remember the word dinosaur, yes, big, large animal, no longer alive, part of history, but yes, most of them were quite dangerous. So that's another aspect of meaning that you're covering there. And I think it's Mark, right? And then Hamza, do dinosaurs have sharp teeth? Absolutely. And if your students say yes, now remember, there's the golden question of how many concept questions should we ask? As many as you want. My thing is to ask as many concept questions, enough that cover all aspects of meaning, not just are dinosaurs big or were dinosaurs big? That's not enough, right? Because if we ask just that and they say yes, well, cars are also big and houses are also big. So, not enough. Great one, but not enough. We'd have to ask a few more. Would you be scared if you met one today? I love that. Has a living dinosaur ever met a human? These are fun. And you know what? Especially your younger learners will actually start enjoying these. And I'm enjoying the humor some of you are putting into them. Another one, would you have a dinosaur as a pet? My answer is no, and I hope your students say the same. Although I can think about my son, he'd probably love a dinosaur as a pet. Right. So thank you for all those wonderful concept questions. Oh, yes. Do you guys know a famous movie with dinosaurs in it? Absolutely. These are fantastic. You're on the right track. Oh, keep working on them because they are ever so useful to really gauge your students' understanding. And don't just ask one or two, ask three, four, five if you like, just to make sure that your students have understood the meaning of the word or the tense that you've taught them. Because remember, we also ask concept questions when we teach new tenses. Right, so the very next teacher language that we're going to be talking about is instruction checking. Now, I will tell you that I learned this in a TEFL capacity. I learned this as a TEFL teacher and doing my TEFL course. But guess what? I brought this home. I started using it at home with my son because I thought as soon as I ask him, do you understand? Do you know what to do? He would just say yes. And I'd know, okay, I need to further check this. I need to double check. I need to find out whether or not he's understood. So, instruction checking questions are so useful in the classroom. Avoid questions like, do you know what to do? Avoid questions like, do you understand? Again, this is a bad question because it's again something that your students will just say no or yes to. And it's a very common mistake that so many teachers make, especially when they're new to teaching. I still let it slip out every now and then. Do you understand? And then I've got to backtrack and think of a few other questions I can ask them to really check whether or not they've understood. Right. So there are different ways of instruction checking. You can ask your students to repeat the instructions to you and to the rest of the class. You can ask questions like, what is the first thing I told you to do? Or what is the first thing you must do? How many questions must you answer? Are you working alone or are you working in pairs? Where will you find the words on the board? Where are the dictionaries in the class? What page number are you meant to go to? So those are instruction checking questions, and I use them every single day. And I do suggest that you use them too. They really, really reduce your teacher talking time, and they give you that clarity and that security that your learners have an idea what to do. One of the most frustrating things is after you've given a lengthy, wordy instruction and your students get started on the task and then someone puts up their hand and says, I don't know what to do. So there are different ways of also giving instructions. Break those instructions up. I am a terrible instruction taker. If you have instructions for me, give me one instruction at a time. Tell me to get out which book, then tell me which page number. Then once I find the page number, tell me which exercise to go to. Wait until I've done that, please. I will find the exercise. I will tell you I found it, and then tell me which numbers to do. And then please tell me how much time I have. Tell me whether I'm working alone or in pairs. And then when you're done giving me all your instructions, ask me a few questions just to double check that I've understood. That's how you give and check instructions. And you'll find it sounds like a lot, but it'll reduce your teacher talk time by so much because those lengthy, wordy instructions and having to repeat yourself over and over again will be a thing of the past. Right. So when it comes to instruction checking, remember you can ask another student to tell the rest of the class what to do after you've given the instructions. After you've given the instructions, you can ask a few questions just to check that they've understood. Right. Your task is to write a few more examples of instruction checking questions. Now, say for example, I've told you, right, you'll work in groups, you'll discuss what you did on the weekend and you have 5 minutes, and then we'll get some feedback. Write a few instruction checking questions in the chat function right now. I'll wait for them. So remember, here's the teacher would say you're going to sit in groups of 4, discuss what you did on the weekend. You have 5 minutes, and then we'll get a little bit of feedback afterwards. So what instruction checking questions can you ask your students to make sure that they've understood? Absolutely, Melissa. You can ask them, so what's the first step? And then they'll say, teacher, get into groups. Absolutely, that's the first step. How long did I say? Thank you, Alicia. How long did I say you need to spend on this task? Or how much time did I give you? Absolutely. And your students will say, 5 minutes, teacher. You're spot on. How many minutes do you have to provide feedback? Yes, these are fantastic. What are we doing after the task? What are you going to talk about? This is copy paste what I would ask my students immediately after giving them that set of instructions. What will we do before giving feedback? Very, very nice. How many people are you going to work with? And you know what else this does? What topic will you be discussing? Do you know what else this does? Is that if there's one student or two students that just didn't get the instruction, didn't weren't listening properly the first time, or they're like me, bad instruction taker, then by asking instruction checking questions and getting your students to shout out the answers, your learners that didn't quite get it the first time, well, it just solves that problem because immediately if they thought they were going to be working for 3 minutes and I say, how much time do you have? And my class shouts out 5 minutes, then one person that thought it was 3 minutes would say, oh, okay, 5 minutes, 5 minutes after all. So can you see why these are so useful and so fun to use actually, because it's like a little quiz that, after every instruction that you give your students. I really find them quite fun and quite interesting to use. Right, so just a few tips before we wrap up the presentation section. Just some good practice when it comes to teacher language, right? Be aware of your use of language, please. And remember, when we say language in this instance, it's not English, Italian, French. This is your language, your vocabulary and your grammar, your phrases in the classroom when you're speaking to your students in English. English is a given. So when I say be aware of your use of language, what I mean is be mindful, be aware of the words that are coming out of your mouth, right? Grade your language. Those of you who punched in those the feelings that you'd feel if a teacher were using vocabulary and grammar way above your level or that you haven't quite learnt in that new language yet. If a teacher were to do that, you'd be feeling horrible. So grading your language is so important and something you can use during your preparation time. When you're planning your lessons and when you're thinking about your teacher dialogues in your head, because teachers, we actually plan what we're going to say. We don't only plan what we're going to do in the classroom, we plan what we're going to say. And something that I find very, very useful is a vocabulary profiler. We do give you a few examples on the course. vocabkitchen.com/profile is a useful one too. So think about it. You can punch your concept questions in to the vocabulary profiler, click on CEFR, and make sure that none of the words you're using are above the level of your class. And this helps me a lot in my everyday planning. right? So when it comes to grading your language, remember it's not only vocabulary that needs to be graded, but also grammar. Students at very low levels do not know those everyday phrases that we use in English. They don't know phrasal verbs. They don't know slang necessarily. They don't know idioms and metaphorical language. So those are all things to take into consideration when giving instructions, when asking concept questions, when eliciting. Also, keep it simple. Remember, you're a teacher. Your students already know your English as a teacher is perfect. Your students already know that teacher speaks perfect English. So you do not need to show off with your language in these instructions, in these concept questions, in these eliciting questions. Keep it simple. The simpler, the better. So, of course, accurate, but absolutely simple. And then also unambiguous. If you're asking concept questions, if you're eliciting, keep it direct, keep it clear, so that your students know what it is you're looking for when asking that question. They need to understand, because remember, teachers, we want our students to answer our eliciting questions, our concept questions, our instruction checking questions, because their answers tell us whether or not they're on track without us having to ask, do you understand or do you know what to do? All right, and then also, as it says right at the bottom here, plan. Sorry, let me just go back there quickly. Plan your questions where possible. Remember, I said to you, you don't only plan as a teacher what it is you're going to do, we also plan exactly what we're going to say. Or when I say exactly, more or less. And very often the vocabulary profiler helps me, but also just keep your class at your core while planning, so that you know that your language is not up here when in fact your students are down here in terms of level. All right. And then to the rest of you who were still sending through those instruction checking questions, they're amazing. What page number? What will we be doing? Are you working alone? How much time do you have? Do you discuss what you did last summer? Love that one. Because then they'll say, no, teacher, last weekend. And you're like, just to catch you out. So absolutely those work. And I can see by the examples that you've put in the chat function today, you're nicely on track. Just keep researching them, keep practicing them. Try them out on people at home. I do it all the time, just to get you used to asking questions in the classroom. It really, really, really helps. Right, so guess what? We are nearing our Q&A. So I do want you right now to start putting your questions. Now, I've been talking about asking questions, but now you're more than welcome to send me your questions. Put them in the chat function and in the chat section, sorry, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. I'll get to as many as I can. And remember, we are definitely going to, yes, try and address as many of them. And then those that we cannot address, or if they're slightly off topic, we can absolutely help you on tutor support. Right. So remember, just before we go on to questions, that all our previous webinars are available on our YouTube site in the video section. If you lose your way and you can't find the webinars, send us a ticket at tutor support and we'll send you the link, and then you can watch them at your own leisure. I love watching them because I learn so much, even as a seasoned and experienced teacher. I absolutely love watching these webinars again because I learn so much, not only from our other tutors, but also from your valuable questions. Right, so our webinars are available. This one particularly today will be available within a day or two, 3 days max, and you'll be able to find this webinar also. All right, so now we move on to Q&A. And I've already got a few questions that have come in, right? Lots of questions that have come in. Okay, let's see. So Chandra has asked a question here. Oh, and Quinn, I've missed yours, but I will go right back to that in a second. Chandra's question is, what would your advice be? Should I get stuck in class when a question is asked by a student? Is it all right to reply, I do not know right now, but I can find out for you? Absolutely, yes. I think it's better, Chandra, to say something like that than to tell your students incorrect information or give them the wrong information. Remember, I always say that when I go to the doctor and I say, right, I've got these 9,000 symptoms, can you help me? And the doctor actually says, hold on, let me get back to you on that. I just want to check out a few things. We can do that too as teachers. We can absolutely say to them, you know what? The way I'm using it is accurate and you're on track, but let me find out for you and I'll get back to you in the next lesson, or I'll get back to you after class. And also remember, Chandra, another important thing to remember is that you do not have to answer every single question in the classroom. I don't know if I'm giving you the right advice here, but I think I am. Because remember, when we're teaching students of a particular level and we're teaching them a particular bit of grammar or vocabulary that is suitable for their level, if another student asks a question that is above the level of the other students, answering it in front of the class who are at the level that you're teaching might confuse the rest of the class. It might throw them off track, and it might make them feel, just like someone said earlier, that they don't know anything in the language, or that student is asking really advanced questions. Maybe I am not in the right class. So you can tell them, I'll answer that question later. Let's stay on track. However, Chandra, if it is related to the lesson and you do not know the answer, you can absolutely say to them, I'm going to find out for you. I'll get back to you in a bit. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, you can absolutely do that. Right, and then Quinn, you've got a question. Let me just display that on the screen. How do we make sure the students who are weaker in English understand during eliciting? So this, for me, is a very important point, because you have in your classroom, usually, Quinn, students of a very similar level. At a language school, whether online or a physical language school, they will not really put students of different levels in your one classroom. Your students will be, if it's a pre-intermediate class, they will all be pre-intermediate. If it's an intermediate class, they will all be intermediate. So in most cases, your learners are at a similar level. But I see what you're saying, that some students just have strengths and weaknesses in the classroom. And that's when it comes to keeping your language graded. So here's the thing that you can do. If your students are B1 level, intermediate or lower intermediate, keep your language graded at A2 level when asking them eliciting questions, so that you're guaranteed that they've understood your journey to get the word out of them. So remember, it's not that you're babying them. It's not that you're not challenging them. You're teaching them new vocabulary and grammar, for goodness sake. But the way you do it, the way you elicit, the way you concept check, Quinn, you can even grade your language a little bit lower than their level. It's absolute. In fact, it's better. We often say grade the language at the student's appropriate level. I say grade it a little bit lower, because as long as it's accurate and clear, you can absolutely keep it nice and simple. And then you know for sure that even those weaker students who struggle a little bit will be on track, because you're using vocabulary and grammar when eliciting that is lower than their level. I hope that helps. All right, so Carol, I don't know if I can type websites here, but I think let's try vocabkitchen.com. But remember, we also give others on, I don't know if it'll come through. I'll try. Because that was Carol's question. The website for grading language. Now remember, Carol, you've got to put your language into it, click on CEFR, and it'll color code your words according to their level. And if a word is, a color that relates to advanced or proficient, well, then you can't use it. And you can start punching in words that would maybe give you better options, right? And then Sarash, you asked, what does grading your language mean exactly? So grading your language means to use words, phrases, grammar that is suitable for the level of the students you're teaching. So if I'm teaching pre-intermediate students, I can't use very advanced English to talk to them while eliciting and concept checking. If I'm teaching upper intermediate students, I can't use proficiency level. If I'm teaching elementary students, I can't speak to them with pre-intermediate vocabulary and grammar. So just to clear that up, Suresh, it's to keep your language at a suitable level, your vocabulary, your grammar, so that your students understand what it is you're saying to them. All right. I hope that clarifies it for you. All right. So here's an interesting question. Excuse me. Rajasvari wants to know, thank you for the interesting webinar. You're so welcome. I'm enjoying this one too, because it really is just reminding me of all these lovely techniques to use in the classroom. So it's an absolute pleasure. How many minutes would you suggest we should spend on or as teachers or tutors for eliciting in a class? So Rajasvari, this definitely depends on A, how long your full lesson is, B, how many new words you have to teach or the tense you have to teach, and also, whether the target language that you're teaching is in fact the main target language of the lesson. So when it comes to eliciting and concept checking, remember that this is mostly during the presentation stage of a lesson. And this stage is when you are introducing the new vocabulary or the new grammar. So I'm sure all of you can appreciate that this differs from one lesson to the next. If you're teaching a 1 hour lesson and it's a skills lesson, like a reading or a listening lesson, and you've got to pre-teach a few words, then maybe it could be as long as a 15-minute session. It could be a little bit shorter. It could be a little bit longer. It just depends on how many new words you'd have to teach. But per word, Rajasvari, I would keep it nice and simple. Give a couple of sentences to elicit the word, drill that word and its pronunciation, ask a few concept questions to check understanding, and move on to the next word. All right. It's a relatively quick process, and it gets quicker as you become a bit more experienced. Right. There are some more questions that have come through. Right. Rachel, thank you for your question. I have come across some wonderful ideas and resources that I can use in the future. How would you suggest I can store these resources, and what would you suggest? Rachel, are you referring to teacher language resources like those that we're discussing today? I just create files on my laptop, really, and I organize things so that when I'm looking for particular resources, I know exactly where to find them. Of course, make sure that the resources that you're storing are photocopyable, that you're able to use them in class, that you're able to distribute it. If not, are there rights? Are there steps that you have to take to access and use these materials? But you're right, there are some wonderful resources out there. And particularly if they're free to use, I would say just store them in a file clearly labeled on your laptop. Also, store them according to level so that you know if you're teaching a pre-intermediate class tomorrow, you've got a nice bit of resources that you can use for that class. If it's a speaking lesson, where are your speaking resources? So yeah, it's all about just finding those resources and organizing them and then accessing them when you need to. All right. You're welcome. Let's see. Right, so Amina wants to know if we have to teach around 10 vocabulary words, can we teach them all in a story or like a bit of text? I would say be careful of this because it exposes your students to the words before you have probably elicited those words. So it depends on when you're going to reveal this the story, for example. So I would say that if you are going to teach a few words, giving them a story with those words already embedded in the story, it really does defeat the purpose of eliciting those words. So I would say that if the context of the lesson is strong and you can maybe set a context in another way, like using an image or using the story but gap take the words out and just ask them what do they think the story is about. There are other ways of doing it, but my advice is, as far as you can, try to elicit the words from them. Try not to reveal the words before you've elicited them, if that makes any sense. All right. Okay, great. And then some of you have let me know that you can see the link. That's excellent. I'm just reading some of the questions because some more have come through. All right, let's see. Would you ask a student a question to correct themselves when they've made a mistake? And if yes, how would you word that question? Oh, Sandra, that is very specific because it's all down to how to error correct. And that on its own should be a whole unit in the course because there are different ways of correcting errors in different situations, right? So when it comes to accuracy and, for example, or during eliciting, say, for example, you're trying to elicit the word and a student makes a mistake. If you're eliciting and there are other students participating, I would say, thank you. I would absolutely acknowledge that student's contribution and then say, would you like to try? I'm thinking of something a little different. Approach that student, welcome them to give another option, and then open it up to the rest of the class and say, would anyone else like to help? Would anyone else like to jump in here and perhaps give me the word I'm looking for? So when it comes to eliciting and correcting during that eliciting process, I would say involve the other students and definitely encourage that student by saying, thank you for that. Nice little contribution. They like the way you pronounce that word, but it's not quite the word I'm looking for. I would like you to tell me how I feel if I'm really, really very, very angry. And then if the student still doesn't know, open it up to the rest of the class and say, would anyone else like to help? Or would anyone else like to jump in here? When it comes to correcting them in an accuracy exercise, yes, well, then you can absolutely correct them on the spot, or you can correct them during feedback. If it's error correction during a fluency exercise, I would say just do not do it. Let's not error correct during a fluency exercise. So Sandra, I would have to probably understand a little bit more about when and the context. But if it's during eliciting, you can absolutely thank them for their contribution, tell them they're not quite on track, would they like to try again? And then if they don't want to try again, or if they're still wrong, invite the rest of the class or a fellow student to jump in and possibly assist with that eliciting process. Right. And then some of you have asked questions that I think really relate to skills lessons, listening lessons, reading lessons. I'm going to encourage you to only keep your questions to today's topic because we do not have much time left. I think we've got 2 or 3 minutes left. Yeah, lots of interesting questions have come in. I'm just scrolling through to see if any questions came in that I might have missed. All right. So remember that if there were questions relating to something else, a different topic of TEFL, and we could not get to them today, you can absolutely send us a ticket to tutor support. Even if it's about an assignment, please ask us. Ask your questions before you make the mistakes, and we will put you on track. We cannot preview your work, we cannot preview your files, but we can absolutely put you on the right track. So if you've got any questions that do not relate to today's particular webinar, please ask. We do not like you to feel lost in any shape or form. All right, so that's it for today. I'm really, really happy to see all these great messages coming through. Rachel, it is fantastic to hear that you're loving and enjoying the course. That's what is supposed to be the experience. And the minute you feel stuck, send us a message. We will get you unstuck. All right. So again, just a reminder that you will absolutely be able to watch this webinar in a few days, but also you'll be able to watch all the other webinars, so all those other interesting topics. And those of you that have asked questions that perhaps do not relate to today's topic, you'll probably be able to find webinars based just on that topic that you've asked about today. So enjoy them. They're made for you. All right. And please join us, same time, same place next week. We really love having you. It is so encouraging. And also remember to fill in the survey at the end of the process. I'm going to put the survey in the chat right now. You can save it and then complete the survey when you have some time. It's so useful. Please fill it in. We love to get your feedback. And it also helps us with planning and thinking about topics for the next webinar. Right, so there's the survey. I will also be displaying it on the screen in a second. Yeah, and any questions that we did not get to today, send them to Tutor Support. All right, thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much for asking your questions. Have a lovely weekend and be safe, and see you on the course. Bye, everybody.